Well, this afternoon's talk is entitled Food Allergies, Food Sensitivities, Foods that Weaken Rather Than Strengthen, and Lectins. Now, this title is making reference to the same problem in foods, just different names. Many different names are being used: allergens, sensitivities, weakening, now recently lectins. The Bible tells us that the Creator made plants for eating in Genesis 1:29 and 30. And then in Genesis 1:31 he tells us all he made was very good. Now what happened to the very good food for us and animals that now weakens us? We are sensitive to it, that are allergens, that are now being called lectins. Well, in Genesis 4:12 it says, Cain, when you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. A fugitive and a vagabond, you're going to be on the earth. So here's Cain, not doing it God's way. The food's no longer strengthening, it's weakening. And he becomes a fugitive. Why? Because he has to flee from where he is, because he wore out the ground. And so he's always moving to new ground, so he becomes a vagabond, moving from one place to another to another. So God's very good food supply was quickly compromised by mankind by the way he worked the ground. Now the word till in Genesis 2:5 in Hebrew is abad, and it means a work of service. Abad is also, in the Hebrew word, dress the garden, also a work of service to the garden. So I've told you these things, but I always like to repeat them because these are significant. God gave mankind a work of service they were to do to the ground, and a work of service to do in planting and maintaining the garden homestead that they were to spread all over the earth. But Cain and his descendants didn't like to be told what to do. Rather than serve the ground in the garden homestead the way they were told to, they wore out the land by doing it their own way. They had to flee from it, and we see that, and became vagabonds as a result. Dr. Reams tells about one farmer with his thumbs in his suspenders, said, "Yep, I've worn out 3 farms." And Dr. Reams' response is, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself." You know, this is the way farming goes. I mean, right here in Tennessee, I remember years back, someone opened up a cannery. They bought 1,000 acres, leveled the forests, and they started a cannery here, and the forests were used to grow beans, 2 crops a year. Within 10 years, they couldn't even grow 2 crops. They had worn it out in 10 years. You know, that's really doing things in quick. Well, the wearing out of the soil results in weakened food. Food from weak plants makes us weak. Now, Ecclesiastes 10:17 says, "My princes eat for strength." Now, that quote was on the cover of the cookbook from Uchee Pines put out by Dr. Agatha Thrash. "My princes eat for strength." That's from Ecclesiastes 10:17. In this talk, we're not addressing the terrible results of processing foods to make them addictive. We're only going to be focusing on what comes from the field because of how it's grown. Now, in Proverbs 12:11 and Proverbs 28:19 both say, "He that tilleth abad his ground shall be satisfied with bread." That should be. But it also says, "He that followeth after vain persons shall have poverty enough." Impoverished crops is a big problem worldwide. This is why they have to spray them to keep them alive so we can eat them. The next verse after Proverbs 28:19 says, "A faithful man shall abound with blessing, but he that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent." Innocent of what? The curses that follow. Not serving the ground the way God designed brings on curses. We read about that in Proverbs 28 and also it's in Leviticus 26. Now today, food is grown for profit. It's the most traded commodity on earth. The farming industry is not innocent of sickening the population. When they breed seed for weak plants, and for needing chemical fertilizers, and for needing Roundup herbicides, and genetically modifying the plants, they create allergens, lectins, food sensitivities, and weaken food. Even when they stop using poisons of all kinds and go organic, the soil life that God designed to feed the plant has been killed by the herbicide Roundup, because it's the most used antibiotic, kills microbes on Earth. Soils must need to be inoculated with soil livestock that were designed to support plant life. How many inoculate their green beans when they plant them? Good, we got one person. Always inoculate them with legume producing microbes. But now you'll want to be inoculating your soil with, say, mycorrhizal fungi. You know, especially if you've been tilling it and chopping them up all the time. You know, it helps to get started with them. So soils need to be inoculated with soil livestock that were designed to support plant life. Seed must be bred to again feed this soil life. Seed, okay, plants that are grown with fertilizers, even organic fertilizers, what happens is that since those minerals and fertilizers supplied the need of the plant shuts off its feeding process where it fed the microbes that provided those fertilizers. Okay? They just shut them off. They stop feeding them, and if you don't feed them, they're not going to feed the plant. When you do this, when the plant produces seed, in the seed, the genes are turned off for feeding those fertilizing microbes. So when you switch over, the plant has to play catch up. Oh, where's the fertilizer? It's supposed to be here. It's been here every generation for how long? Because they've been, you know, the organic grower or the chemical grower has been supplying it, but it's not here. So they got to start scrambling. They got to start changing their genetics, and like the fish that's blind, 3-4 generations. So sometimes you get some pretty lousy production because of the seed you're using. It was designed for chemicals. So the closer thing is get seed that's organically grown. Better to get seed that's your own, because you got to start somewhere with seed. So save your own seed. I try to save every bit of my own seed. When I buy seed, it's usually because it's a hybrid in particular that I want, like Sun Sugar cherry tomato. That's top. Somebody made a hybrid cross that was great. And then save your own seed from whatever you start with, and it'll get better and better growing in your environment. And it will turn the genes back on again to get to feed the microbes that are going to feed them. So let's see here. The parent plants that grow seed must have disease suppressive microbes to pass on to the seed. And God's designed plants must be used, no GMOs. So another thing that seeds need is microbes that go along with them. The parents passed on the microbiome. You're all familiar with moms pass on a microbiome to their kids, right? And so we got to protect that microbiome, because that microbiome in our guts is what transforms fiber foods into an light oil fuel. 85% of the body's cells use for fuel gasoline instead of diesel. Diesel's a light oil. They use sugar. 15% of the body's cells do not use sugar for fuel. They use this light oil fuel, okay? And that is what the microbes in the guts make, this light oil fuel. And that's the only fuel our cells that protect us. When you have disease resistance, you have, what do we call it when we, this word skips me sometimes. Well, anyways, let's look at this. Our gut lining has cells, and it is our, what do we call it? They produce, they keep us healthy. Oh, I forgot that name. But let's switch to this subject, then you'll understand better. 80% of the heart muscle does not use sugar fuel. It uses that oil fuel. And the American diet, the sad American diet, they only get 1/10 of the fiber food they need in their diet. Not only that, how many people use antibiotics and wipe out the microbiome that converts the fiber into this light oil fuel? So here we have an American population where they're constantly starving their heart muscle. Constantly starving their heart muscle. That's why it's the #1 killer in the United States, because they're not getting the fiber that they need in their diet, nor do they even have a microbiome that can convert that fiber into the light oil fuel, into a butyrate type fuel. This is why America is so sick with heart disease, but you've got to keep that microbiome healthy. So that's an example. The mother passes the microbiome on, and so the seed too, like I told you, they have recorded up to 10,000 different species in seeds that the mother passes on. Now, if they don't have the ones they need, they've got to go scramble for it in the soil. If they've had their genes turned off to feed the microbes, they got to turn the genes back on, and then they have to start rounding them up out of the soil because they don't have them with their mother. And this takes a couple weeks. And when that lost time, the weeds who have the microbiome and are designed for the soil, they take right off and they get to jump. They get to jump on the crop. You know, in your garden, we just take right off because they have that microbiome they need. So we have to, not only inoculate the soil with the soil-borne microbes, your mycorrhizal fungi and stuff like that, and other fungi that serve the plant, but we have to also put the microbes back in that belong in the seed. And this is where I told you about, the Native Americans, the Iroquois, those down in the Southwest, where they put the microbes in the food, not just in the seed. They put it back in the seed, so when the seed grows, it'll have the ability to grow well in that climate. Okay, so a thorough restoration of God's way to grow food must be reestablished, and we can read about that in Commentary 7a on Leviticus 25. We did just recently. And then also the blessing that's going to result that you read in Deuteronomy 28. We've read that, and in Proverbs also, there's a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death, sickness, disease, and suffering when you eat food grown by men who make haste to be rich. They make haste to be rich. So what's the solution? Grow food God's way. Now, let's take a look at the history of growing food. We'll begin with the definition of allergy to give us a background. Webster's Dictionary says, a condition of unusual sensitivity to a substance or substances which in like amounts do not affect others. Some people, they've got a stronger liver. They can handle the toxins themselves. Others can't handle it too well. And so the dictionary definition also says allergens are usually protein substances. Now, Dr. Gundry, you've probably seen his advertisements on YouTube there about lectins, and they're in this, that, and the other thing, and don't eat this, don't eat tomatoes, don't eat that. These lectins, these toxic protein substances, I'll tell you the protein substances, have come for a number of reasons. Historically, they were first in foods because man switched over from using microbes that would take the nitrogen out of the air 78% nitrogen, to using manure. Manure is nitrogenous. And so they started using that. And that's where you get in the history of this, you get your market gardens. You know, first it starts with Cain. Why are they using the manure? Because he started building the first cities. Not enough room to grow. So what do? You force food, crank more out, using nitrogen. You use manure. And so you have these market gardens in Europe, and they're providing the manure-grown foods. And Samson Morgan, at the time, he lived in the time of Ellen White, he talks about how during the Crimean War, no antibiotics, that was about 1900-something or so, and he said, a lot of serious injuries of war. And he said, the guys from the city, they'd fester up and die. But he said, the country boys, many of them would not fester, would not die, because they're not eating manure-grown food. You don't have that much manure out in the country. I mean, what do you have? One cow? One milk cow or something? You know, you got a horse. But in the city, manure is prevalent, and you're growing for a lot of people, so you have all that manure. And I know, because when I was a kid, I was pruning with this old guy, and he remembers the railroad cars coming up from New York City and stopping at the orchard there and unloading the cars of manure. And then they put it out on the orchard. Well, Samson Morgan said, don't be growing food with manures. Grow food with plant material. Either a mulching material or grow crops that are going to, because that is a better quality food. People don't fester up when they get sickness, when they get injuries and stuff like that, like they do when they're eating the other food. So this is forced food, nitrogen forced food, historically used, and it began with Cain, by using manures when you're growing them. So plants are supposed to take the nitrogen out of the air. And proteins are when you take nitrogen and you add it to your sugars, and that gives you your construction material and the enzymes for developing the operations that have to go on in this structure that you created with those proteins. So after we advanced into explosives and started making explosive manufacturing plants, these nitrogen are explosives. The Chinese made the first explosives. What they did is they took the fertilizer, they bought the floors of people's huts, which they would normally dig out periodically and spread on their fields when they were growing the vegetative stage of growth, because these floors were developing calcium nitrate, which is a vegetative growth fertilizer that's used commercially. And they would take those floors and they would pour ashes water through it, and they would change the nitrate from a calcium nitrate for vegetative growth to a potassium nitrate, which is saltpeter and explosive. So this nitrogen, these chemical nitrogens, they're explosives, and so these explosive making plants, and in this case I don't mean plants, I mean manufacturing operations for World War I, after the war is over, what are you going to do with them? They invested a lot of money in them. Okay, well, you can make fertilizer with it. This is why, the Oklahoma bombing, McVeigh putting a van full of fertilizer, ammonium nitrate, in front of the building and popping it off. The Ducks Unlimited, a branch that helps increase duck populations, they would take a bag of ammonium nitrate, soak it in gasoline, put a blasting cap in it, and put it out in the marshland. Boom, instant 1 acre pond. Very explosive stuff. Matter of fact, when they make ammonium nitrate fertilizer, they put it way down on a railroad track on its own out there, just in case it goes off. And so this is what they did. So they switched over now to these nitrogenous explosives for fertilizer. They say if you want to, and all of this talk now that I'm giving you is all because of these things have an impact upon our behavior. There's a saying, if you want a mean dog, Feed them gunpowder. Okay? Well, here we are using gunpowder to grow our foods, you know, and we don't want to be mean. We want to be like Christ, you know. That's not too smart. So proteins are the building blocks for everything, and we want to use the airborne nitrogen. Only the microbes provide that. So that's why we want to grow biologically, supporting these microbes. And then we made even further advancements, and that was the Green Revolution, where they started pushing the use worldwide of nitrogen fertilizers, you know, chemical fertilizers. A friend of mine was in Peace Corps, and he worked in many nations in the world, and he taught them how to use that chemical nitrogen fertilizer to increase production, okay? And then, of course, we're increasing production again now with genetic modification. And when you genetically modify, you don't just genetically modify for Roundup, you genetically modify maybe 10,000 different other modifications that we don't even look at or care about, but are toxic. Rattlesnake poison is a protein. When we genetically modified wheat, and let me put it this way because I'm not supposed to say that. When we mutated wheat, what does mutation do? Doesn't it modify genes? Okay, but you're not supposed to say that. So when they mutated wheat, they ended up with a short stalk. Borlaug did it, and he got a Nobel Peace Prize for a short stalk because it didn't fall over as easy. And the reason they accepted the short stalk is because they had trouble with a long stalk because they never had enough potassium. They were wearing out the soil. There wasn't enough potassium to hold that stem up, like these stems in these trees are held up real good with plenty of potassium. That's why we use ashes for a potassium fertilizer. They didn't have enough. They'd fall over large. They'd lose the wheat. So he gets, you know, he saves the world by increasing the wheat population tremendously with a short stalk. But he did like 10,000 other changes. And so the proteins, now we have protein in the wheat. And it's whether it's organically grown or not, that modification created proteins, which is now we have so much gluten intolerance. Because now we have proteins in there that are not digestible. We were never designed to digest rattlesnake poison and a host of other different types of proteins that are not good for us. So that's not a good way to do things. So. Okay, and like I said, proteins affect the thinking process and our behavior. And it's God's design that the proteins are to be manufactured by plants from nitrogen in the air. And plants need to feed them. They need to build the soil for the free-living nitrogen organizations. And we, of course, all know about legumes, how they even build apartments, and then feed air and sugars to the microbes in their nodules on their roots. So paradise has been changed, and when you change paradise, you don't improve it, you degrade it. Perfection is damaged, and useful proteins become toxic poisons. Now, construction is altered also. Mutations occur, like the dwarf wheat. I talked about that there. We have the gluten intolerance as a result there. Human behavior is also altered. And another thing that begins to happen, when you have these poor quality grains, you now have food for molds. And molds can be very serious. For instance, ergot in rye. How many have heard of St. Anthony's fire? Okay. St. Anthony's fire was when in Europe, say France, where they grew rye, you had a poor crop and you sort of ran out of your rye in the springtime, and so you resort to eating the poor quality stuff. Well, there was ergot in it. And ergot is where Timothy Leary got his LSD. And so here you got whole villages now eating their poor quality rye with ergot in it, and they're tripping their brains out with tripping from LSD in their foods. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about my allergic reactions in a bit, but I just had one of them was at one time even worse trip than LSD. It was sweet corn that I had. I'd been down south talking at the time of year when I should be taking care of my garden, and I come back and the sweet corn was sort of past, so I just started eating a lot of it for supper, for breakfast, for lunch. By evening, I was out of my mind. We call that schizophrenic. I was manic, and then 6 hours later depressed, ready to jump off the mountain in the backyard there. And so manic that I'm talking to my wife, and she says, you're crazy, you're just so frantic. I'm you know, she goes up in the bedroom, locks the door. I walk up to the bedroom door and think nothing of it, lift my foot up, kick the door in, walk in and keep talking to her. She said, I'm going to Mom's. She walks down the street to go, and the Lord says to me, remember years ago when you were out of your mind like this and you found out it was the corn? And then I realized, oh yeah. I said, oh honey, you got to help me. I know what to do. Shut up. So I shut up for the next 2 days. This LSD trip is about 8 hours. This is a 2-day trip. Out of your mind. Manic, depressive, up and down. And because of the mold. We'd clean out half or more of the mental institutes in the United States if we take the people off corn. Corn is an enormous commodity. It's probably the biggest commodity on earth. Okay, they use it for everything. And, you know, a friend of mine grows commodity crops. He's got a small farm, 1,400 acres. And he's telling me prices are low on corn. Okay, they were low on corn. And one of his neighbors has 5 bins. And they're larger than this enclosure here. And very tall, full of corn. Hadn't sold it in 5 years. Okay, and it was moldy. And, you know, as I've learned with Dr. Scow, who was in the agricultural industry there and consultant and stuff in that, you don't throw away stuff like that. You cut it. You know, if you get bad wheat, a railroad car full of bad wheat, you don't throw it away. That's too much money. You cut it in 5 other cars with better quality wheat. So this moldy corn, it gets in our food. And not everyone has the strength of the liver to remove that toxin. Okay? And so we're loaded. We're loaded. I mean, they use corn for everything. You know, the corn starch, high glucose fructose corn syrup, you know, corn proteins. And so we have some pretty serious things happening to us. And then we have peanut allergies now, and nut allergies, and these mycotoxins that are in them, and the effects that they have on us. And here we are trying to behave like Jesus. Fat chance is not going to happen when you're poisoning yourself constantly. These have bad effects upon us. When you're eating all this nitrogen grown from chemicals, you're gonna be like that mean dog. So, okay. So this all began with Cain, and he did not till the ground. We had the cities, and these markets in the cities used the manures, and so that's where we began to get poor quality. And of course, the farmers are selling in bushels and bins, and they want to make a profit. And everybody knows, add extra nitrogen, you blow it up. So they're blowing up the food, whether it's organic, blow it up with organic nitrogen, or blow it up with chemical nitrogen, because you're selling in bushels and bins. You're selling in volume. And the quality, of course, fades. And they force food with manure, like I said, and I told you all of these here. Now, As a child, I had asthma, and I was sick often. These are allergies, and it was due to allergies because of the food we were eating. And then at 13, I so-called outgrew it. Well, I started working in an orchard at 13, and I started eating all that fruit. And of course, when you're picking peaches and you reach up into a peach and it's soft, you're supposed to throw it on the ground. I didn't. I ate it. Boy, they were good. Because you got to eat you have to have the hard ones that are going to ship. Same apples. I would eat them. Pears, I would eat them. And then I'd sort during the wintertime, and I'd eat all that. And so, of course, all my allergies start to go away. I'm starting to clean my body out, eating better foods. We didn't have a lot of fruit. Fruit is expensive, but when I got it at the orchard, I started getting better. Now, in my 20s, I hurt my back. I decided to build a stone house, of course. So that's a little rough on the back. And so I see a chiropractor, but he was a kinesiologist chiropractor, and they do muscle testing. And he knew that all his patients are coming in here, and he was a conscientious Jewish man, a very godly man. And he came in here. And he wanted to know, why are all my patients, why do the muscles get weak on one side and it yanks out? And so I told him I was an organic gardener. He said, well, bring me in some organic food and non-organic food, because I had, there's peach trees there, they're non-organic, and I can get the sprayed stuff out of the orchard. And sure enough, he's testing the food, and the stuff that's non-organic doesn't weaken me. And the stuff that's organic doesn't weaken me, and the stuff that's non-organic weakens me. So I learned that you can be weakened just because of the chemicals that are in it and the way it's grown. It can weaken you. So, and then later, let's see how the things went. So that's I learned that test, and then I also learned muscle testing from him. It's real easy. You just push down an arm or leg or something, you resist, and you see how much strength you have, and then you eat these foods, and instantaneously, you don't have to eat it, you can even smell it, because the chemicals come in and they register in the body, and it shows a weakening. And so I learned to do that for myself. So I'm testing all my food. I didn't do it on myself. My wife would test me, or we'd test the kids, and the kids test each other, just to see what foods would weaken, because we were really curious. Because, like it says in Ecclesiastes 10:17, my princes eat for strength. And so I wanted to eat for strength. So I was able to stay strong by eating foods that kept me strengthened. I wasn't constantly battling with food sensitivities or food weaknesses, because I would be muscle testing my food all the time. Now, I also began to just eat organic food. I wasn't growing all my own food, just growing, vegetable garden and stuff like that. And I would buy organic foods. But then I noticed that sometimes the organic foods weren't very good. They were weakened me. And I said, so what's going on here? Well, I moved to Utah. All my allergies went away. Why would they go away in Utah but not in Connecticut? I was growing on bulldozed land, okay? So everything I grow out there, because that's highly, highly rich soil. I mean, it's so rich, when a blade of grass falls in the irrigation ditch, it comes out looking like my finger, all white, coated with calcium. And that's the #1 mineral you need for health, is calcium. And also for the liver to detoxify. And so I moved back to Connecticut. My allergies come back again. I moved to California. My allergies all go away. The land flowing with milk and honey. I did soil analysis there. We're talking 10,000 pounds of water-soluble calcium. You take a reading right here in the forest here, you're barely going to get 1,000 pounds. It's not enough here for growing vegetable crops. Okay, so I'm in California, and all my allergies go away. but that's the kind of food I'm eating. It's good quality, and you can buy stuff grown there. Then, so now I'm growing my own garden. I'm saving all my own seed. Now I moved to Arkansas. Worn out land, cotton on cotton, all worn out. But this time I moved with my genetics, my own seed. I saved all my own seed, and I planted it in that ground there. And that first year I was allergic. It weakened me, 13 of my foods. But my job at Watch at the Hills Academy was farm manager. I was to build the soil. The next year I was only weakened by 6 of my foods, and the third year I was weakened by 3 of my foods. I was building the soil back up. And so now I'm getting the mineral content I need. And so I learned by that is a lot more involved than just the soil and where it's grown. It's also in the, I mean, I learned that it was the soil and how it's grown, but also that the genetics can change. You know, it can adapt, it can get better. So you have 2 changeable things. You got the soil you want to improve, and you want to improve the genetics. I've already talked a little bit about improving the genetics and the microbiome that has to be in it in order for it to give disease resistance to the crop. Let's see. So the 2 major problems are the soil that has to be changed and the genetics in the plants. Now in conventional agriculture, you have chemical fertilizers and chemical sprays. In organic agriculture, you have natural fertilizers and natural sprays. But in regenerative agriculture, sometimes called biological agriculture in Europe, you have microbes providing the fertilizer, and with them providing the fertilizer, you have disease and pest resistance. Now that's what we're shooting for. This is God's design. Biological agriculture, sometimes called regenerative agriculture here, is using God's design. His design is there's no sickness and disease. Now in God's design, fertilization is the duty of microbes that are supported by the companion plants in a garden, design. Now why companion plants? Why a garden design of companion plants? And that's because plants feed each other. When you increase they call it diversity, when you have the diversity of plants in an agricultural setting, you increase the microbial fertilization, because plants manifest the character of Christ. They share. He came to be a servant. They serve each other. And so you increase the service going on. Now disease resistance in God's design is imparted by the microbiome on and in the seed. They feed the plant when it begins to grow, and it grows God's way. To grow our crops that's you use the microbes to do it God's way. And now how does God's way work? Plants were designed by God to be fertilized by the microbes. Plants exude into the soil, and upon their leaves microbe diets. I mentioned a little of that. Plants can make thousands of different diets. There's 50 to 100,000 different in the soil, and these diets will attract the specific microbe, making the specific nutrient that the plant needs in the quantity it needs. Remember, the mycorrhizal fungi not only have a highway to transport nutrients, they have an internet system. They've taken a probe in an unbroken forest where the microbial population from root to root has not been broken, and 10 miles away instantaneously they will pick up the signal from that probe. There's internet in the mycorrhizal fungi, and it goes as far as it's unbroken. And so that's what the plants use and send their orders to what they need. And as for the different types of food nutrients, there's one company, it's a worldwide company, and it has recorded now 17 million different species of microbe. It has recorded. How many are out there? Lord knows. Anyways, plants are designed, you know, to feed about 50 to 100,000 different ones because they'll need these different ones in their makeup. So, you know, this is a lot of fertilization for us to try to get correct in our own mind so we fertilize the plant. Forget that. Let God's design operate the way it should. And then you get disease resistance in the plants. And we talked about how families, when they grow their own food, what are they going to do? They're going to taste it. And their bodies are going to tell them, this is good. This is good. This is just what I need. Okay? And so we want to use these systems that God has set up in us. Okay. Now, let's just take a look at God's design here. We talked about how God has designed what is called rhizophagy, and that is rhizo meaning root, phagy meaning engulfment, how plants engulf microbes, bacterial, fungal, and algae, and these become part of the plant's genetic material. And that genetic material governs how the plant behaves. And when the design that God gave them, if it hasn't been changed, and it can be changed by feeding chemical fertilizers, organic fertilizer, you can change it, but if you get it back to growing naturally by letting the microbes feed it, then you're going to have a plant with disease and pest resistance. Okay? And when you have pest resistance, you have a condition whereby the insect have antenna, and when the infrared, we're bombarded night and day with infrared, bounces off of a plant, that antenna takes a readout and can take a refractometer reading, if you want to call it that, can take a nutrient content reading of the plant, and it will only eat unhealthy plants. Same thing with microbe spores. When they land on a plant, they take a readout, like a spacecraft landing on the planet. Take a readout as to hospitableness of the climate there. And if it's a healthy plant, they don't have a job. These pathogenic ones that are going to devour, because God has a cleanup crew. He's designed a cleanup crew, which is a curse, okay? But it's a change that he designed into plants. Because remember, he made them how to function properly, and he made them how to dysfunction. So they become God's cleanup crews. You know, I think of cucumber beetles, and you know, they'll get on the young cucumbers that I plant. I'll plant the seed that I got somewhere, and they'll be devouring that stuff. And so I put them in organic matter. I make a little wad of straight compost down the divot that I made in the soil, and I put the seed right in the organic matter, and I get less, because they can more quickly now, since the seed doesn't have the microbiome it should have, they can more quickly gather what they need, because I'm putting them right in compost. And so I have less of the cucumber beetle eating them. But the cucumber beetle was designed by God to be not a devourer of the cucumber, but a pollinator of the cucumber. In some species of the cucurbita genus there, they are the sole pollinators. So here is a curse, a degradation that God designed for them to clean up the junk, because he doesn't want us to eat it. This is why insects, fungus, bacteria, and virus destroy our plants. This is why I let them have them in the garden. I let them have them. If one's is sickly or something, or a dozen are sickly, they can have them. I don't want them. I only want the plants that are healthy, that can do it on their own. And then I save the seed from them. Okay, so that they'll have the microbiome in their seed that will give them that hardiness that they need. Let's see. Now, when we save seed to grow our own food plants, we select what seed we want. Now, commercial agriculture selects seed this way. They want the plant obese, more volume, more money. They want them to have cosmetic appeal, to look like they're healthy. They want uniformity in size for packaging, and they want uniformity in looks, shape, and color. Now at first, taste didn't matter. Just add sugar, salt, butter, or oil when you cook it or serve it. But when taste began to matter, do you think they started using God's method and increased the brick levels in it? No. I remember some nice pineapple, nice yellow looking pineapple, sweet pineapple. I said, hey, this is pretty good. Pulled out the refractometer, poor. They had learned to breed into it mannitols and sorbitols, you know, sorbet candies, you know. It gives you that taste in the mouth that is sweet, but it's not. And they bred in, you know, some colors too, and you know, you can do a lot of stuff with breeding today. And so you can make all kinds of stuff look like it's good, but it's not. Rather than correct the soil, because if you do that, you have to switch over to a biological system, and you cut out the fertilizer men, petrochemical fertilizer men, you cut out the petrochemical sprays. Not only that, you cut out the pharmaceuticals, because now you're feeding it to your crops. You're feeding these crops to your animals, and now the animals aren't getting sick because you're growing it God's way. So you're not going to get cooperation in the educational industry that tells you what's good or what's bad, because there's so much propaganda. You're always going to be told use other ways, you know, that are profitable for those industries. So let's see here. Okay. What about growing produce God's way? The produce is smaller and grows slower. Smaller, less money. Okay, grows slower. You don't get a return as quick. It does not ripen at the same time for mechanical harvesting, but that's better for home harvesting. You don't want the whole harvest at once. You want spread out, makes it easier. It's not tough-skinned enough for commercial handling. It's tender and it's pleasant to eat. Okay, it's nice to bite into something that's nice and juicy, and instead of chewing away, and it requires organic matter to be replenished for microbe habitat so the microbes can feed the plant. That's a lot more work. And most people don't know how to do it using plants to do it. We're going to be going into that tomorrow. And herbicides must be stopped because they kill God's fertilizer makers, the microbes. You know, all these herbicides are antibiotics. You know, Roundup is an antibiotic. Most used antibiotics on earth. Now, now you have to hand weed it until the soil is rebuilt, because who has the quickest growing microbiome? The weeds do. Your crops, you haven't grown them in good enough soil to develop a strong, vigorous microbiome, so they take right off. But regenerative growers have. They have developed seeds that take right off and get the jump on the weeds, because they've created a soil environment that the weeds don't do good in, because they're redeemers of the soil. And what happens when you redeem the soil? For instance, I told you about daisies. You know, my wife likes to take pictures of little girls in a daisy patch, and I know that's a calcium deficiency, and I don't want it in my orchard, so I put the lime down. What happens? The daisies go away. So the weeds don't proliferate. They don't have the strength anymore to outdo the crop, because the crops now have a soil designed the way God designed for them, so that they can grow for you healthy food. And so now you're back to God's design, where every family had a home in the land with sufficient ground for tilling, for serving the plant's needs. But we don't want to get our hands dirty. We don't want to grow. Leave it to somebody else. So what good does it do? You know? You can go do what's right, but if you don't want to do it, you can learn what's right as I'm teaching you God's design. But if you don't want to grow your own food, but I like what the doctor said. He said, you got to take a stand sometime in life. And if you don't take it with that COVID vaccine, then even if you're going to lose your job, you got to remember God is faithful. He's going to take care of us. And we got to make a stand too. as to how we're going to get our food supply. Are we going to grow it ourselves on our own soil, adapted to our own ground, adapted to our own environment? Are we going to trust God that He's going to do this and He's going to see us through to this? I suggest we all just get started. Okay, so here's an example I cut out. Someone had it here. It's a vegan diet impacts prisoners in California. And this was a 500 inmate prison. And it was a Seventh-day Adventist who gave a proposal for a prison that he was going to build for the prisoners. And his stipulation was that if he was awarded the bid to build it, the inmates serving sentences at his facility would be offered a vegan diet. And they were not only offered a vegan diet, but they were also offered Bible studies, job training, and anger management. But they all were offered a vegan diet. And they were told, yeah, they'll burn the place down before they eat that type of diet. 80% chose that diet, the vegan diet. And this is what happened. It says, the remarkable results for 7 years before a dispute over, the most remarkable prison success program in the country, where inmates go out and stay out. At the rate, the state of California had a, I don't even know how to pronounce it for recidivism rate of 95%. In other words, they're thrown back in again. They get into trouble and they go back in. 95%. This is common throughout the country. You know what percent went back in after their program? Less than 2%. But they closed the prison down after 7 years because they had a dispute over phone money, because prisons are for making money. They're for making money, and evidently they were trying to help the inmates out be able to call too. And so they closed it down. Obviously prisons are not for reforming anybody. But this is the impact that it had. And it talks about how, you know, they even got a picture here. The inmates would go out and play basketball or something together instead of blacks here, Hispanics there, white here. No, they're all playing together. They're all playing together. You know, it changed the behavior. Now, this was just vegan. But I would imagine these people who did it, these Adventists, knew enough about to get as much organic produce or high quality produce as possible. Okay? So they're not going to be buying GMO food and stuff like that if they want to see results, and they got results. So they're buying food that's, you know, closer genetically to the way God designed it, although it may be, you know, modified a bit for organic fertilizers and stuff like that, but basically the quality was such that it created this type of result. So this is basically what I wanted to present here, and is that we may say, well, I don't get allergies, I don't have food sensitivities, but how's your behavior? Do you get irritable? Do you get agitated? I mean, this is not the character of Christ. Okay? So, if we want that perfect character, we're going to have to do something about it. More than just study and read and pray. Okay? This body of ours is environmentally impacted, epigenetically designed by God so that the environment will alter behavior. It's not just doing it to the plants, it's not just doing it to the animals, the fishes, it's doing it to us too. This is serious business. We got to consider this and begin to do something about it. Okay, so that's my conclusion here. I guess we can go into question and answers at this time. Yes. You know, if you have any questions, because I haven't gone into the details of this system.
If you'll
go ahead.
Until I get to you, we'll get you on the video when we can hear it.
Maybe you want this microphone to give the...
No.
Oh, okay, very good, very good.
Don't have to.
Not so much a question as a comment.
Oh boy, you better use this thing for my ears. I can't hear a thing.
Speak up.
I'll speak louder.
I'll come up closer too. Go ahead.
So on our property, we have an orchard.
Yeah.
And we have about 25 fruit trees.
Yeah.
And the most recent growing cycle, I just took a break this year. I didn't prune, I didn't spray, not organic, inorganic, anything. I didn't do one thing to that orchard. I had the best harvest this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a
Exactly. Because it doesn't have anything to do with you. You don't need to fertilize orchards. They get all the nitrogen they need out of the air. They adapt themselves quite well because this is a woodland environment. If you clear that type of environment, they do well there. And Sister White says grow berries. And that's because they produce every year. She didn't say don't grow the orchard, but she says the berries produce every year, whereas your crops like apples, pears, peaches, that stuff can be every third year on average. Okay, so your backup for fruits is going to be your berries, and can them, freeze them, whatever. So, but they do what they want. I don't do a thing to my orchard. Not a thing. And except graft it over, because my dad would put the trees in there, put thin-skinned Macs in there. They can't take anything. They can't take anything. You need something that can do well in your environment. The best trees ever are the ones that Bob Jorgensen had been working on for years. What he would do is he would go to the countryside, to the mountain areas around here, and just talk to the folks, and he'd say, you know, do you have any apple trees around here on anybody's farm back in the back 40 there that are producing really well? And they seem to produce well almost every year. And if they say, yeah, he'd go see the farmer, go visit him, and then he would come and take cuttings from it. And he was starting an orchard of all different trees that do well on their own, don't need anything. In other words, like the seeds that are designed for petrochemical fertilization or for organic fertilization have shut off the genes that feed the plants where the microbes feed them. Well, this apple came up on its own. All these different apples came up on their own. And they work well with the microbes in the soil. And so they're producing beautiful fruit, and nobody does a thing to them. Nobody does a thing, except, you know, you can maybe prune it, give it a little more air circulation, or keep it down low so you don't be too high, so the ladder is real high. Yes?
How do you inoculate your seeds?
How do what?
How do you inoculate your seeds?
Okay.
What do you put on them?
Advanced ecological, well, okay, let's start from the past and work ourselves forward. The catalogs that sell you your beans will have a little thing right next to in the bean section, inoculant, legume inoculant. They'll sell you an inoculant. They used to sell you a pea inoculant for the peas, a bean inoculant for the beans. Now they'll sell you a combination inoculant that'll inoculate any of the different beans, soybeans, you know, all together. So you buy some, and I just take them, put my seeds in a can that I'm going to put out, and pour a couple drops of water, just enough, and then pour the powder in, and you sort of stir them up so they all look dirty, and they're inoculated now. Then I plant, and I don't, you know, sit the can out in the blazing sun and stuff like that. These are soil inoculants. They don't like to be out in too much light, so I just get them right in the hole, cover them right over, and they're inoculated with legume inoculants. Now that's been around for a long time, decades and decades. Recently, when they began to learn about the mycorrhizal fungi, they developed the fungi so that you can buy mycorrhizal fungi, and you can put your seeds, you know, put your squash seed and other seeds, so that you make sure you have some mycorrhizal fungi in the ground. Okay, and it's good to do that, because if you have agricultural ground that's been used chemicals on, or been tilling off the microbiome, the mycorrhizal microbiome in the soil, then you want to reestablish it. But eventually, you want the native mycorrhizal fungi to take care of that job. But in the meantime, when you first start, you want to use these inoculants. And so they have different inoculants now. Fedco of Maine, since I buy seeds from them when I want to try some different seeds, they have a section, a farm section, where you have different types of inoculants. And so you can look at them and read and learn about them. Learn about the different type of inoculants that exist. Now, stepping up further, we can use some of the most advanced findings that our native ancestors were using, and that is endophytes. And these are naturally engulfed by the roots. I said it's rhizo, meaning root, phagy, phagocytosis, and these go into the plant, and they can alter the genetics. They alter the genetics of the plant. They become what the plant is. People are saying now that we, us humans, since there's 10 times more cells of other critters in us than we have human cells, that we're more of them than we are ourselves. Plus the fact that they have 100 times more genetic material in us than we have in us. And this genetic material goes into our cells and alters our cells. Well, the Native Americans, the Lord just inspired them, and they listened. They knew how to listen to him. I mean, I can't say they got out their electron microscopes and started, yeah, they didn't. And so in the Southwest, and the Iroquois up in the my area up there, they in the Southwest, they would take the saltbush and some of the other plants that grow really well in a severely droughted environment like New Mexico, and alkali problems, alkali slicks, high levels of potassium and boron and salts and whatnot. And they would take those plants, soak them, crush them up, damage the cells, break them open, and put a little water to it and put their seed in the water, because the microbes living in that tissue whose genetics were operating the plant had resistance to the drought and resistance to the toxicity. And they would enter the corn. And now your corn seed has drought resistance and toxicity resistance. Okay?
How long did you leave them in that corn, in that water?
What's that?
How long did you leave them in that water?
I don't know. I'm not a Native American. I didn't do that. These are just some of the researchers. This researcher who was telling this happened to be Native American. She was from the Southwest. She remembers the ceremonial things they would do that we make fun of as religious behavior. It's not. It was wisdom. And so she put two and two together, because she's now studying the endophytes, fungal endophytes in plants and their genetic alteration of the plant, and recognized that's what we were doing. And the Iroquois were doing the same thing. John Kemp talks about them. Others recognized that the Iroquois were doing that and changing it. Yeah.
It's been said that plants are similar to animals in behavior, in that if you feed an animal what it's designed to eat, it'll take that first. If you starve it down, it'll take whatever it can get. And it's said that plants have a tendency to do that as well. And case in point being that if you give the plant what it's designed to feed on, it'll take all of that up.
Sure.
And leave off the things that it shouldn't be taking to a degree, Whereas that same plant grown in a heavily toxic environment without the things that it needs will take up a lot more of the toxic load. Would you speak to that?
Sure, exactly. Will cattle, if they have choice and plenty of feed, will they eat the lush green grass around a manure paddy? No, they won't. It's excessive nitrogen. They know better. Okay? And so, you know, you have the same thing. You can force feed plants. You corral those cattle in, there's nothing to eat. They'll eat it. You flood the soil with fertilizers, they'll take it up. You know, I mean, you can, and flood is the word, water soluble. You know, that's what the NPK on the bag is water soluble fertilizers. Yeah, that's not the way to do things. It's a proper way to feed cattle is free choice, because they know what they need. Yes.
So they're flooding all the grocery stores with horrible food and not giving us any choice.
You have a choice. Grow your own. And if you don't have the land, say, Lord, you said that every family should have a home on the land with sufficient ground for tilling. We got to put him up to who he says he is. He says he's running the show. He's got the power to do things. Have him prove it to you. Have him prove it to you. Tell him, Lord, you said to do this. Open the way, I'm willing. I got no money. Open the way, I'm willing. And you know, we were studying last night and about the one of the feasts, and it says that we were supposed to take of our, what was the feast? The feast of what? Dennis, there. I'm not sure which one. The one where we give back to the Lord because our crops were so bountiful.
Tabernacle.
Yeah, and so we're studying that, and so you know, we all say give back to the Lord. Well, what does give back to the Lord mean? And they said also that everybody at that feast, even the poor, was among them. Well, what's the most obvious give back to the Lord? Give it to the poor. Give it to the poor. But look at this. How many people, and also the idea is that we need to not be keeping so much for ourselves that we can't even use it. Then we can be helping others with it. Well, how about land? How about land? There's so many people that have way more land than they can handle.
And they don't want to.
Invite somebody over and say, hey, you want to live here? You know? You want to use this land? There's plenty of land out here. And there's plenty of people with more land than they can use. I mean, you got younger families starting up. Their kids should be raised on there. They shouldn't work their way up until they can finally get a piece of land out in the country and the kids are gone.
Yeah.
And they've grown up in an environment that had an epigenetic impact upon their behavior that wasn't good. Because you were making money so that you can get out to the country without the kids. Go ahead.
Oh,
And
the
then-
reason I was asking that too was a lot of times when we start learning some of the reality around us and just what situation we're in, it can tend to be discouraging if you realize, well, I don't have all the right seeds. I don't think my soil's any good. Well, I don't live in a good place, and it's going to be 3 years before I can get out of here unless God works a miracle. And the reason I mentioned that is if that is true about the plants, it harkens to everything else that God is doing in nature. He's constantly redeeming, and we can join that work in any time, in any fashion that we're able to, and God will bless that to the extent we're able, and we should be learning these things and being intelligent, but not to be despondent. If you can't run the whole race at once, start moving in the right direction, and remember, it's like those plants are like little animals, or even your kids for that matter. They're gonna eat good food if you'll give it to them. Give them the best you have. and know that God designed them to take the best.
You know, when the Lord said, move your kids out, your kids should be raised in the country, I just up and left my home in the city. And moved out to the country with my 7 kids. And I didn't own anything, and I ended up having to move around. But the Lord provided places in the country for me and my wife and the kids. And I did this for 19 years until the kids grew up, so they had the country environment. And today, they're all in the countryside now, you know. And so I didn't have any money. I didn't own anything, but there were people who had land, who, you know, that were willing to let me take care of their place or whatever, you know, whatever because I've moved at different times, you know, through the 19 years that I was away from Connecticut. You know, I was just moving around out in the countryside. Some of the times were farm manager at Watchita Hills Academy for 3 years, and up at Country Life Vocational Academy in Wisconsin. But other times I was just on land out in the country. A guy at Adventist wanted to start an orchard, but he wasn't there all the time, so it's one of the places we began. And God opens the way. God opens the way. I was in Hawaii there for a couple years. He opened the way for me to move there, and I even went through a divorce at that time with my kids before I remarried again. You know, all kinds of stuff went on, but God's with you. He'll take care of you, you know. Yeah, I could tell you stories, but we'll stick with the agriculture. Yeah.
When you were in Arkansas, you said that you planted your own seeds, and
Yes.
the first year it didn't do real good, but the next year it had
Well, the
more
first year I
microbes,
was
and then the
allergic to
third
13
year
of them. They weakened me. I had allergic responses that weakened me. The next year, only 6 of those weakened me because I was improving the soil. And by the third year, only 3 of those plants were weakening me because I had been building up the soil so that you got 2 things going here. You got the genetics of the plant and you got the soil. Both of them need improvement.
Okay, my question was that you were talking about the microbes, how they were increasing, and is there some kind of instrument that you have to test the soil to see that, or how do you know?
Me. I was the guinea pig. Use muscle testing. I told you about the chiropractor I went to who taught me muscle testing. Muscle testing is a muscle that's strong, stays strong. You taste the food and you stay strong. You push it down, or you taste the food, you go right down because you're allergic to it. It's not made properly. I don't know if I gave this example, but when I first got the Lyme and realized I had to be very careful with my diet, I only used the organic food, and so I bought a 50-pound bag of organic popcorn. No problem, stayed strong. 50-pound bag of organic popcorn. No problem, stayed strong. Third 50-pound bag of organic popcorn, I figured, I'm not allergic to organic popcorn. I've just been eating it for a year, a couple of bags. Different farm. Within 6 days, I was on crutches. I was on crutches from the Lyme because I had already learned the proteinaceous material in these grains or beans or nuts is what brings on Lyme if it's grown improperly. So got off that, and I grow my own popcorn now.
I love it.
You had a question.
Well,
I think sometimes we think that we have to have a lot of land to grow
Mm-hmm.
our gardens. We only have like just right under an acre, and we started taking our flower beds and took everything out from them and started just amending it. And we have 3 gardens, one in the front, one behind us, and one down at the back. The one at the back, we're coming up on 7 years. Do you rest your garden at the 7 years?
I have a plan that's about a page and a half in a notebook of when I started using that ground. And on the 7th year, I know, like I just recently looked up, okay, 25. What am I going to rest this year? So I leave those alone and I let them rest. And so you want to divide things up. This is why he said divide it up into portions or sections, is what she says. I think it's, can't remember the book. Anyways, that's what you want to do. And so I have all particular gardens or orchards or berry patches or whatever divided up. I rested a certain portion of the kiwi arbor, and I'm going to rest the other portion this coming year. Okay, same thing with grapes. Some portions of the grapes and other.
How do you rest your grapes? And
The scripture says 2 things about resting. Resting is no seeding, no pruning. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything else that I know of. No seeds, no pruning. You don't plant during that year. You don't put in seed, and you don't prune.
So I have a lot of things that just love to come. My basil comes back every year, which is really weird, you know, but I guess it's gotten really strong. My basil's coming back. Tomato plants, because we do heirlooms.
Fine.
Just let them come up.
Yes, let them come up and grow. Yeah. The thing is, you can't harvest them. You can eat them. You can eat from the land, according to the Bible, but you can't put them up.
Okay.
Okay? You have to let somebody else put them up. You give them to them.
Okay.
I just invite the church members over.
Well, we give away. Yeah.
I let them come and, harvest it.
Just let it.
Especially when it's the orchard or something. They're yours. I'll eat all I want, but that's it. You can only eat what you want, what you need daily.
We didn't plant any more cantaloupe, but yet we had way more cantaloupe.
Sure.
And the neighbors harvested it while we were gone. And
Yeah.
Stuff, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like God's agricultural design there. I worked in an orchard, and we'd pick the orchard, and we get, we pick it through. And God says, don't go back and touch anything you missed. Leave it there. Well, I see this old Italian guy coming through the orchard, and he's picking all the misses. And he says, this is the best food. And sure enough, you take a reading of it. Here you got the tree, still with leaves on it, and leaves that are making energy. Where do you think it's going to go when you only have a couple apples left on the tree? Right into them. The brick level swords, the best tasting stuff. So to the poor, God gave the best quality. Every year they got the best of the best. So I like his method.
Can you plant different color raspberries together without them
Sure.
crossing fungus or whatever? Because I've read that you're not supposed to.
No. This fungus stuff, don't pay attention to that. As for crossing, occasionally things cross, but that's fine too. You get nice stuff sometimes, usually junk, but sometimes you get nice stuff. I found a Japanese jewel berry, very nice berry, that was yellow one time because I brought in yellow raspberries that actually cross over, but they're all rubus, the genus rubus. They're just variations of rubus, a lot of variations of rubus, a lot of different species. Yeah, stuff will cross, it's no problem.
So, would you say that gardening is optional or not optional? What would you say?
I'm trying to teach you that God says this is our responsibility and that it is the school I have designed for eternity for you to grow in the knowledge of my character. I mean, I would say that's not an option.
Any other questions? Then we thank you very, oh,
Oh, I do have
Couple
one more
of them.
question. Are you familiar with ground cherries?
Yeah, I don't like them.
I love them.
I know.
I love them. They're like a superfood.
Uh-huh.
And I know they can be invasive, but I let them grow in different parts of my garden, and then,
You know that cantaloupe that comes up on its own?
uh-huh.
That's a foreign plant. That's invasive. Yeah.
well, that's true.
It helps my garden.
It's like in California, they say the Himalayan blackberry is invasive because it's all over. That stuff is delicious, big, beautiful berries.
Yeah.
And then they say the Japanese jewelberry that grows in Connecticut is invasive. Man, that stuff is so nice tasting.
Yeah.
They're wacky with a lot of the stuff they say. Well, see, what they're doing is they're evolutionists.
Yeah.
It took millions of years to get the varieties we have today, and now these things are replacing it.
Yeah.
No, it
But we
didn't.
don't till, so everything
Sure.
comes back out. We
Sure.
just use-
Yeah, great.
So they're waiting for the next million years. I forget me.
Yeah, that's it's all kinds of fables out there. Yes.
So when you rest your land for the 7 years and you say not to plant anything, does that include a cover crop?
Well, it's like this. I'm resting it for the year, and so I figure anything that I would do normally. Now I don't really know when a year starts. Okay, so I'm just considering January 1st. Maybe I'm like Ellen White, keeping the Sabbath from 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock, which she did first and then found out later what it meant. But I just stop at the year. So I usually put in something that's going to grow in the fall, you know, because I want to keep something growing on it. And it'll come up the next year. But I just don't do anything. You know, the rye will come up, produce, you know, 7 feet tall and just fall down and, you know, let it do its thing. But I leave it alone that entire year. Maybe I'm supposed to do it spring to spring. I don't know. But I do my garlic because garlic is garlic. You put it in October or so, and I do my year that way. You know, I'll not plant garlic in October and let it go and not have garlic there, and then plant garlic in October, you know, a year later. So I don't necessarily use January 1st as a date, just however my season goes.
So are you planting the same crop in the same place all the time?
Yeah, I like to. When you're planting diversely and with cover crops, you're growing other plants together. You're creating an ecosystem. Do these plants change? Okay, next year we're going to have something else in here, another crop other than these species. It's not the way God designed it. He
Yeah, 'cause
designed ecosystem. That's what a garden is. Remember I said there are vegetable gardens, herb gardens, flower gardens, orchard, vineyards, things like that. God taught us to grow gardens. And he taught us the designs, the ecosystem designs, and these designs were companion. These plants are companion. It's a companion planting design, which is what God taught us to do. That's what he meant by garden.
Because they say that if you plant potatoes or tomatoes in the same place year after year, that they will start developing disease.
Yeah, you grow with the chemicals that they give you, yes, they will.
What
Yeah.
about the gardening?
If you don't change
And
the
agri.
little diversity in there, yeah, they're going to get sicker and sicker. Don't grow like that.
They've got it.
Grow God's
They
way.
have
Grow
a
with
mixture of
cover
people
crops,
talking.
like I said,
Some
with
are
tomatoes,
this
you know,
way
like
and
that.
some are the other
Clover
way.
down, tomatoes in, put the tillage radishes in the fall, and pretty much leave it like that, you know, and then do it again the next year, and then rest it on the 7th year. But she also says, Sister White says, change the crop after the 7th year.
So not as often.
What she means by that? I don't know, the word change means change, I guess. Put something different in there, you know?
What's a companion with companion? I mean, how do you know how these, they do this with this and this with this and this
Yeah,
with
they
that?
say all kinds of things. They got books on companion planting and this, that, and the other. I look at companion planting as what will enhance its nutrient uptake. What will it exude, the plant exude into the soil that will increase microbial populations that are going to benefit my plant? You know, I mean, we all know that, and the growers now, the generative growers now are putting clover in with the corn. You know, a legume in with their grains. That's a no-brainer, you know. They know if they put on nitrogen fertilizer, they can increase the production, so therefore let the legume, which is serving the microbes, which is taking the nitrogen out of the air, let that be. So those are your companions. That's the way I view companions. Now, of course, you know, basil with tomatoes, you know, and they say stuff like that. And, that's probably beneficial in certain ways, growing them together. But study it is what I did. I was leaving, when I first started working with that, I had peas on a wire, and I was leaving. I said, okay, this dandelion here is a taproot. I'll leave it around the peas. And I noticed peas aren't doing too good around that dandelion. Observe closely. He said, that's not a companion. And so just observe what seems to improve and do better. This is all observation. This is all empirical evidence. God wants us to do everything based on empirical evidence, okay, which is observation. Because when we learn to observe, what are we going to see? We're going to see the service that's going on in nature, His character.
Question here?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about like bags of dirt, like potting soil. Is that stuff unsafe?
Stuff they sell in the store?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd go get mine outside.
Yeah. Because
I wouldn't
I
buy the stuff in the store.
so don't buy. Okay.
Yeah,
So when you build your soil, what do you build it with?
plants, organic matter. I collect leaves, and we have trucks come and dump wood chips. I live in the city. I have a farm in the city. This is in New England. It's a colonial city. In other words, the colonial cities fed the city on the hills around it. So I'm in the hills, in the very edge, up in the ridges around Meriden, Connecticut. And so I have suburbia all around me. Not a good environment for kids. Okay, but what's that? Yeah, I let them compost, and it's excellent soil. And what I do to that soil is I add lime to it and soft rock phosphate. Do not add nitrogen. Do not add potassium to your potting soil. You want to start the seed out growing short nodes. You know, Home Depot, push them fast because you want something up so you can sell it, right? Okay, with nitrogen and potassium, you don't do that. You grow them squatty, short, with calcium and phosphate. With just plain old lime, plain old soft rock phosphate, whatever. And that will give you a squatty plant with short internodes, and the more internodes you have, the more fruit you have. And two, that increases the quality. It's not force.
Is rock phosphate better than just straight phosphate?
What's that?
Is rock phosphate better than plain phosphate?
I don't know what plain phosphate is.
Okay, well, what kind of phosphate do you use?
Soft rock phosphate is dinosaur bone, and bone meal is the other form of phosphate. Question here?
Could you speak more to, like what the lectins are and how you would determine whether or not they're,
Did you say lectins?
yeah, and the food,
Yeah, lectins are nothing more than allergens. And they're in food because of how it was grown. It's all based on how it's grown. You know, he's got Gundry has a squash tomato on the cover, you know. Oh, you can't eat solanacin, you can't eat that family. It's got lectins in it, it's got proteins that are this, that, and the other. The problem depends on how you grow it. Depends on how you grow it, what you have in it.
So
Okay,
if
if you're growing it properly, you don't have any of these problems in it. You can eat the stuff. If it's grown with chemicals and stuff like that, yeah, you can have lectins in it. You can have proteins that are foreign, that the body has difficulty using, yeah.
so can you test by eating the foods, can you test if you have a lectin in that food by your muscle test? Does the muscle test show you those?
Well, muscle test indicates weakness. Remember, the title of this talk is Food Allergens, Food Sensitivities, Foods that Weaken Rather Than Strengthen, and Lectins. They all are basically the same thing, just different names and titles as people have studied the subject over time. But the bottom line is every single one of them is there due to how we were managing the soil. Due to how we were managing the soil.
No hands, so we thank you very much.
Is that before or after we change the clock?
After you change the clock.